Well, good evening, and welcome to our February 12th meeting of the Policy and Government Relations Committee for the School District of Waukesha Board of Education. I'd like to call this meeting to order. I don't believe we have any speakers this evening, correct? All right, and can we verify that the meeting has been properly posted?
Yes, it has.
All right, thank you. So let's move on to our first action item, which would be our approval of minutes.
I so move.
Is there a second? Moved by Ms. Voigt,
I'll second.
seconded by Mr. Borowski. Any comments or discussion on the minutes? Seeing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Passes 4-0. And then let's move on to our first policy action items this evening. The first of which is policy 7440.02, which is a new policy on smart monitoring equipment.
All right. Well, good evening, everyone. Good to see you. So yes, as Mr. Zenobia said, this is a new policy, smart monitoring equipment. It's referring primarily to what we're using with our new Verkada system, so it's timely in our secondary schools in terms of vape sensors in the restroom areas. And so this policy outlines how those smart monitoring devices can be used, where they can be used, and ultimately the guidelines around the use of them. So with that being said, you've had a chance to look at it. Let me know if you have any questions regarding it.
Mrs. Voigt.
Just wondering if it should identify that that's the type of monitoring? Because as as you're reading about the smart monitoring equipment, et cetera, it could be on the school buses and all over the place, including restrooms later on and et cetera, that it's not video camera oriented, that it is more, that kind of a sensor?
Yeah, they use the term, it's a good point, Mrs. Voigt. They use the term smart sensor technology
Right.
several times.
Right.
Which would not I guess you're right. I mean, it doesn't necessarily say it's not a camera. It certainly is not.
Yeah.
But as I was reading this, it's like, what kind of smart monitoring is this? Because, one of the smart monitoring I've heard about recently is like being able to pick up on people's like eyes and being able to identify, who they are and if they're an intruder because of that, kind of monitoring, It just is like a scanner that's just
Yeah.
picking up on the irises.
I had a similar concern just when I read through it. I was kind of waiting for like a definition of what smart, I'm sorry, what is the term used? Smart monitoring equipment was. So I don't know if just a statement of generally what it is with maybe a couple examples. I don't know. I don't want to, convolute it. I'm just looking for clarity. And I think for the same reasons you mentioned, Ms. Voigt, especially since they mentioned restrooms and locker rooms, I feel like it'd be good to have something in there that just a little more descriptive or specific about what it is or what it could be, or some examples of it.
Yeah, because it's in the cover.
It is.
So I knew that that's what we're going for, but the policy itself doesn't say it.
Go ahead, Dr. Siebert.
Oh, Mr. Wad, feel free.
Yeah, so I get where everyone's driving at, but there's language in here that talks about the identification of intruders. I wouldn't assume that a vape device would be used to monitor for, so I'm looking at, and I think this is where it tries to define what smart monitoring equipment is in the first paragraph. Information obtained through smart sensor devices may be used to identify intruders and persons breaking the law. I think we need to be careful that if we're really just truly talking about vape sensors, that maybe that's how we structure the policy and remove some of the language around, unless we are going to have monitoring devices as well that help us identify potential intruders and sensors, right? Smart sensors.
It says smart sensor in the first paragraph and electronic monitoring equipment. So as part of Verkada, we do have the ability to put in a picture of someone.
Right.
A license plate, et cetera, that will be recognized. So it does cover both of those, but in the case of the electronic monitoring, it is using a camera. In the case of some of the vape or smoke detecting sensors we have in the restrooms, that's not using a camera.
Right.
Go ahead, Steve. Yeah, Steve is a good source on this too.
So the vape sensors that are in the restrooms are multi-sensors. They don't just sensor vape, they sensor sound, they also sensor motion. So they can be used to detect like occupancy, off hours, things like that, when you don't want them, when you don't want people there. So that's why they're a multi-sensor
Right.
device. They're not a camera, there's no camera there, but they do detect multiple things. If you want them to, they can be configured to be multiple detectors.
And is our intention to use them in that capacity?
During off hours, I would say yes. We would want to detect motion, we would want to detect, things like that, yeah.
And maybe just giving examples, like some examples might be sound detection, motion detection, vape, facial recognition, et cetera. I don't know. That might suffice, just giving some examples of that rather than, like I said, especially when it said restrooms and locker rooms. I felt the need of it in general, and then when I read it a second time, I read that again, and anyway, to me, it seemed like some type of clarity there. Oh,
Mrs. Voigt, go ahead.
Could it be something like after smart sensor, like parentheses, and identify, like the kinds of smart sensoring that he just mentioned? Like the first time it's used as a kind of definition or kind of explanation.
are you saying in the second line there in the first
Second
paragraph?
line, authorize the use of smart sensors that could, identify, however the wording could end up going.
I'm even thinking maybe just at the end of that sentence, because it goes on, smart sensor and electronic monitoring equipment on school property and in school buildings and school buses. Maybe there, give a few examples.
I think a lot of this has to do, and you can add to this, or correct me if I'm wrong, Dr. Siebert, has to do with our camera systems and what we've already had for a long time in all of these places, school buses, in our buildings, on the outside of our property as well. Not only to see what's going on, but to, detect a threat if that were the case. The way that I read the policy is, the smart monitoring equipment, the current equipment that we have is becoming more and more advanced. And with our new systems going in, these are becoming more advanced. So our cameras are smarter than they were before. The only downside I see to putting a lot of language here is, as things change in technology, do we need to be so specific about what it is we're doing, as opposed to board and the public having an understanding of what's actually there and what it can do. I think we've had vape sensors for a while, correct?
In some schools, we have had them for a little while, yes.
So, is it fair to say that this new technology is even better, or is it similar to what we've had in the area of smart technology? Is it, I think this system is an upgrade.
It is.
no
Correct,
doubt.
it's more advanced, right? It has more sensors, correct.
So now we can, like you were saying before, do more with them, detect more, depending on what we want to do.
And they can be configured to detect or turn those features off, anything you want, basically.
Sure.
I mean, I guess the flip side of it is, so is it maybe does the district want to be less specific? And maybe it's just a matter of clarifying that we're enhancing our current capabilities. and this is not, we're not talking about videotaping. I don't know. Maybe say what it's not rather than get into all the specifics of what it is. I don't know. It just a thought that occurred to me. So I'm throwing it out there.
Mr. Watt?
Yeah, I'm kind of on the same page as Mr. Borowski. So, the first thing that I thought when I read this, and I got to the section that talked about locker rooms and so forth, was the incident that they had, I believe it was at Arrowhead, whether that was a year or two ago, where they discovered there were video cameras in an area that was being used as a alternative locker room. I don't know if it was a library or whatever, and people were outraged about the fact that there were cameras in an area where people were changing. I get the gist of what this policy is, but I'm wondering if we need to put something in there that indicates the exclusion of the use of video monitoring, and we can designate, I suppose, what those locations are. But that might make more sense than trying to maintain a policy for every type of new monitoring device that comes up and what it may or may not monitor for. So I kind of like the idea of exclusionary language, that which we aren't authorized to install anywhere in locations we feel it would be inappropriate, or the type of equipment.
I can appreciate where all of you are going. You know, we could, for example, put in, here's just a draft of a sentence. Smart sensor and electronic monitoring may include smoke and vape detection, facial recognition, and overall school safety measures with and without the use of video monitoring. Video monitoring is not utilized in bathrooms and locker rooms.
Yeah, one thing I'll say as I'm hearing all the discussion, my intention wasn't to list everything that it could possibly do, but just to give some examples, so people have an idea. So I do kind of like your suggestion there, because it gives some examples. It does have the exclusionary language. Yeah.
And if you liked something like that and you could wordsmith it, I might suggest we put it at the end of the third paragraph, where it talks about determination of where to use, that the superintendent is responsible determining where to put it. It's made in a non-discriminatory manner, where it may be placed, and then that's maybe where you could even put the video monitoring is not utilized in bathrooms and locker rooms. Maybe you put that sentence there, and you could put the first part about what smart sensor and electronic monitoring is maybe in the first paragraph, if you wanted to break it
Oh,
up.
yeah. Yeah.
I would also suggest,
No, good.
I would also suggest bathrooms as well. I mean, I'm thinking any place where someone could be found in a state of undress, right, is, I think, the primary concern.
Yeah. I think, Dr. Seaver, did you say restrooms?
I said bathrooms and locker rooms.
Oh,
Yeah.
Yeah, or I could say restrooms, I'm not.
That's okay. Yep.
Yeah,
I-
you
Say
said
that's what I
it says
heard.
restrooms, yeah, so we'd want to use restrooms.
And I do like, personally, I think clarity or like some type of example or definition earlier in the policy is better than later. So I like the idea of having part of it in that first paragraph, Dr. Siebert, and then the exclusionary language in that third paragraph.
Sure.
Mr. Watt?
Yeah, just a quick kind of follow-up on that. So, drawing back on the experience that they had at Arrowhead, if my recollection is correct, that was not designed to be a locker room. As I recall, it was a library or some other
Like a study hall room, I
was a
guess.
study hall room or something. It was not a locker room. They had chosen to, for whatever reason, to use that space for a locker room for some events. So, I don't want to go too far down a rabbit hole on all kinds of policy, but is that something that we might have occur at any of our schools, where some location is used also as and would people know never to do that going forward, so that using language that's contain the bathrooms and locker rooms?
Would suffice for the school district of Waukesha, yes.
Okay.
I had a question, a little bit off of that, but, so do we post anywhere for the students, for families that know exactly what is being monitored in, like a vape sensor? I'm sure it's common knowledge of the students, for the most part, that they exist, right? To what level do we have that posted, or where is that the students or families would find?
Good question. I would assume we have, Steve, do we have something in the handbook on those pieces? We have it in the student handbooks, and then there's obviously signage in the actual buildings.
Okay,
Yeah,
okay. Thank you for that.
yeah, thank you.
So, we're talking about possibly amending this. I know we had a couple suggestions. I don't know if anyone wants to take a crack at
Want me
it.
to read it
or-
again?
Yeah, I think Dr. Siebert had something.
So if we, at the end of the first paragraph, if we said something to the effect of, smart sensor and electronic monitoring may include smoke and vape detection, facial recognition, and overall school safety measures with and without the use of video monitoring. Because that kind of umbrellas the electronic monitoring part. And then at the end of the third paragraph, after the libraries comma, we would say something to the effect of, video monitoring is not utilized in restrooms and locker rooms.
I think that that's the video part at the end, in that one place. But I don't think you want to say that there is video cameras in a lot of the other places that we're talking about in the big picture.
Yes,
You know, and I think that these are just a few examples of what could be included under these smart censoring. You know, I think the video cameras are definitely still part of that. You know, I think
Yes.
your definition, you know, should include the smoke and vape detection and the, you know, sound monitoring and some of those sorts of things. Like, I think most people realize that there are the videos, but that this is moving into those other kind of sensory kinds of, you know, monitoring. So read your definition of what it is again, like at the end of the first paragraph.
smart sensor and electronic monitoring may include smoke and vape detection, facial recognition, and overall school safety measures with and/or without the use of video monitoring. Because some of it, like, for example, the vape detectors aren't cameras.
So with or without,
Yes.
yeah.
Yeah,
Yep.
I think that sounds good. I mean,
Mr. Watt?
Yeah, so, Dr. Stieber, could you read the sentence that you had crafted for the end of paragraph 3?
Sure. Video monitoring is not utilized in restrooms and locker rooms. Or locker rooms?
Yeah, I'm wondering about, do we want to include language that specifically states it shall not be used? As a,
Yep.
our policy as a
Policy.
board is, and as a district is, we will not use video recording in those locations. Shall
I
not.
think that strengthens it.
Okay.
Yep. So it would say video monitoring shall not be utilized in restrooms or locker rooms.
Do we think that encompasses the areas that we need to be concerned about within our district? Are there any other? So, and I'll just give you an example of something that pops into my head, right? And I'm thinking places where wardrobe changes occur, say backstage of auditoriums, for example,
Yep.
or, and I don't know, I mean, I don't know if that's an area to be concerned about or not, but are there other places that we might want to take some time to make sure we're covering? And I would see this more as something that would, I think, make our students and families feel more confident that their students are not going to be getting videotaped in a place that they didn't expect to, or in a, like I said, in a state of undress or some other.
No, it's a good point. I mean, I think you could get there through something like, video monitoring shall not be utilized where a reasonable sense of privacy exists, such as locker rooms and restrooms. That would somewhat incorporate that, but we'd be happy to take this back and spend a little time playing with it and bring it back.
Yeah, I mean, hold the thought on I mean, I like the way you phrased reasonable sense of privacy or whatever, but one of my other just notes as I was reading through this, in the very last line, the board will not tolerate, or will not accept or tolerate the improper use of smart sensor equipment. So, I think now we're in that balance again of too much specificity, or does that cover what what Mr. Watt is talking about of some other area in the school that you could possibly change clothes? So I don't know if we need examples of improper use, or would that possibly cover what he's,
We probably would.
and would that suffice for, I guess, the committee?
So should the statement be down there? Because it's kind of defining that would be considered wrongful use.
Potentially. So just for some clarity, I think, on my part also, I completely agree with not wanting, I mean, we don't have cameras in any bathrooms anywhere. That's right.
No,
So,
no.
so the locker room is an obvious place where you want it, or any, like you mentioned, any place that there would be people undressing. But do we currently have any cameras in locker rooms that we know of, or
No.
there's not really an intention to do that?
No.
Correct, okay. I guess part of my thought was, in the reason why those cameras existed there was for, obvious things like maybe theft or, so I guess I wouldn't want to, I wouldn't say I wouldn't want to limit that, but I guess understanding that that was a consideration of why something could be done like that is helpful to know. So since we're not doing that currently, and we don't have an intention to, then I'm okay with going ahead with some of that language. I don't know if we need to take it back, and I don't know how pressing this is. I know it's an action item tonight, but I don't know if we can maybe consider it at our next meeting, or if
for
we
sure.
need to, okay.
Yeah. Yeah, we're actually, Julie and I have been talking, we're getting down to the bottom of our list. We have another Neola update coming on March 18th, but it's a relatively small one, we're told. So we've got a few hanging out there, but there's nothing that says we can't bring this back.
Yeah, and I don't know if that's necessary, but I know Mr. Watt has some more comments.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I just want to make it clear, I think that it is, a common concern of parents as the technology for monitoring in all different ways and forms increases. And we are in the midst of a security upgrade within our buildings to clarify for our community what we will not be using, that I think everyone in the community would say, good. I'm glad that that's been spelled out. So that's my intention in the language. I wouldn't have assumed that there would have been anyone that would have wanted to go forward with that. I think it's more of a statement for the community,
Sure.
so that they can feel confident that their kids won't be under surveillance that they would not find appropriate.
No, that's fully understood. I'm actually glad you said that, because I think parents do want to feel like when they send their kids to our schools that there's a presumed level of safety and security, and to the point that we can, and privacy, and to the point that we can use policy or administrative guideline or handbook language to clarify what that means. And with this new system that has tremendous capability, we want to make sure it's used right. And so, to that point, we will have other facility security type policies that will be coming forward with updates to Verkada, so there's no reason we can't bring this one with that as we move forward. Happy to, because I think we made some good adjustments here today, and we're really close.
One other clarification that I was looking for on this one was toward the bottom, second to last paragraph, it talks about information that would be obtained by the district could potentially be used from law enforcement. You know, if something was going on in one of the schools, or, you know, probably drugs comes to mind as one major one. But could you just give us a little bit of background on how that information is, I guess, collected, and how it would be different, if at all, with the new system? And kind of what is the process for when, you know, we're contacting law enforcement? Because one of the earlier questions I had about, you know, posting it and our students understanding that this technology is there and, you know, should be somewhat of a deterrent to things that they shouldn't be doing anyway. At what point does that action lead to needing to talk to law enforcement and kind of, you know?
Yeah, no, that's a fair question. So it kind of depends on the type of event. So in the case of, you know, we have the cameras that depict some kind of a argument that turns into a fight, that turns into aggressive back and forth activity. Depending on the level of that, the police, the SRO at the school, we're talking secondary schools, or if it comes down to the elementary, hopefully we're not having that there, but they come down there too. They might get involved if the severity rises to that level. Same with the vaping that gets into the THC level of vape, and/or other illicit drugs that might make their way into the school. And once the principals are uncovering those things, if we're using the sensors going off in the restroom, the SRO will get involved in that part. There's always parent communication in all of these examples. But it kind of depends on the severity of the level, and as the severity increases, that's why we have the great partnership with Waukesha Police Department.
Sure. Thank you. And it helps to just kind of hear some of that, I think, especially for those that, you know, are concerned about some of this new technology, how it's used, and, you know, what are some of the consequences of its use as well. So, are there any other questions or discussions that will be okay with, go ahead, Mrs. Voigt.
Is sound used in the bathrooms? Like to have like a sound recording of like a discussion that kids are having when they're skipping out of class or whatever?
No,
So we don't use anything like that?
no. Steve talked about wanting to use it maybe after hours so that we could detect if there was motion or something going on in the school that shouldn't be, but during the day, no.
Clarify that, there's no recording, but there is a sound level detection, so if it's a very
Oh,
loud
it
sound,
gets very loud.
like a gunshot or somebody's yelling or fighting, there would be a detector that can detect loud sound, but no recording.
Got it.
Does someone need to recap that? I don't know if his voice is being picked up for those listening. I don't know.
You want to come up, Steve?
Just in fairness to the community. Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah, so just to reiterate that, there is a sound detection level, so loud sounds would be detected but not recorded. So there's no audio recording, it's just detecting loud sounds in the case of an emergency situation.
Thank you. So, if we're not having any more comments or discussion, I think it's fair to say that we'll take another look at this and bring it back with some other policies.
That works. Thank you. Good discussion.
All right, let's move on to the next action item, which is policy 7440, facility security.
All right, so this one has an addition of one sentence that is looking to reflect a recent Wisconsin Court of Appeals decision which permits searches of non-student visitors and non-student vehicles on school property under certain circumstances, and the pertinent case citation is listed at the end. So it's actually the fourth paragraph that says the board authorizes the superintendent to conduct searches of non-student visitors and vehicles on school property where there is a reasonable suspicion of violation of the law or school rules, and the search is reasonable in scope related to the objectives of the search and not excessively intrusive.
Are there any comments or questions on this one? Mrs. Voigt?
I have one. It references on page 3, like if notification requirements do not apply if the person will be on school grounds to vote in an election. You know, and do we have any buildings that are still used for election purposes?
No.
And we had changed that a couple of years back when we were
Yes.
worried about the safety and security kinds of things. So just for clarification. So
Sure.
that's there, but it doesn't necessarily pertain to our circumstances. And the other is a comment. I'm surprised to see the fines in one of our policies. On the second page, about a third of the way down, where they've now removed it.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that seems very statutory, rather than our typical school district types of policies.
Yeah, I thought the same thing, Mrs. Voigt. I mean, we're not in the business of levying fines as a school district, right? So I don't know that it belongs in our policy. So I think it's actually a good
Good removal.
elimination.
Mr. Watt?
Thank you. So, I don't know if anyone else here had the opportunity to go and actually read the appellate decision that led to this. If you haven't, I would encourage you to, because I think there are some very interesting constitutional questions as a part of this. And that kind of leads me to where I would be interested in your perspective, Dr. Siebert, on the application of this. I guess the first thing that I would wonder about is if such a search were to occur, who would you empower to make those decisions, to conduct them, and who would conduct them in the case of, say, a vehicle that was, for whatever reason, under suspicion of having something in it that would potentially create a safety issue at the school?
What I'm envisioning here is you have some kind of a day at a school, right, where you have volunteers in the building, and it happens to be the same day that you do like a dog search in the school, and the dogs run through the parking lot, and they hit on a car that is one of the visitors, that you would have reasonable suspicion to look at that car, is the way I was thinking about it.
Okay. So did you happen to read the appellate case to see what the foundation was?
No, I didn't.
So just in a nutshell, it basically was somebody showed up at a school looking to have a student leave with them, and staff became very concerned about someone sitting in a vehicle out in the parking lot that was also there, and for whatever reason, they felt it necessary to search the vehicle, and they found a handgun in it. So it was a very isolated situation in which there was staff in the building who became concerned because of this series of events and people who were present on the grounds, as opposed to, I think, what you're describing, which is maybe a more broad sort of unscheduled or unannounced, like,
Sure.
just gonna be here. Those are the situations I would be more concerned about, because while this upholds, that if you go and read the appellate decision, as I understand it, I'm not a lawyer, and I don't know if we've talked to any of our counsel about this, but the way that I interpret it is what made this a reasonable search centered around the fact that it was a decision made by, and a search conducted by district employees, not by law enforcement, who would have a different constitutional threshold based on, constitutional due process and search and illegal searches and so forth. So I'm just wondering if we've thought about how we would tackle something like this without getting ourselves in trouble if we add this language. Because while I understand that this empowers the school districts to treat anyone on campus the same as they would any student, as far as searches and so forth go, I do think there's still a possibility when you start dealing with private citizens that you could wind up finding yourself in a situation, if it's not executed properly, of potentially triggering some issues around illegal searches. I don't know, maybe I'm way off base, but I guess before I'm willing to adopt this, I'd like to have a better idea of who and how how those decisions would be made, who would make them, and who would be authorized to conduct those kinds of searches at our different buildings.
Sure. Well, it's the principals at the schools, if they determine that they think something seems funky, seems out of sorts, that it would have the ability to do that. You're right. Obviously, the police have a much different threshold for what they can do than what we can do. But a locker, for example, is school property, right? And so if we have reasonable suspicion that something smells in that locker, something doesn't seem right, something's moving in it, whatever it might be, I mean, we have the ability to go in and look at that. Now, that's not a non-student or a non-visitor. We're not in the business of, frisking people when they're checking in to the building or anything like that. But if there was something that arose, certainly you'd want the ability to do it. And if you didn't feel confident, you'd call law enforcement in order to try and help.
Yeah, no, do you have another comment? No. Okay. Anyone else have a question or comment? In the spirit of what's been talked about, I certainly see the, even in the example that you gave, Dr. Siebert, if a dog was running around and alerted to a car, that would involve private law enforcement right away. I mean, in fairness. And I think it is, it would be interesting to know how we might consider what some of the steps would be for a principal or anyone to, go and address someone in a car who's not a student, like a family member or someone, say, hey, we have reason to believe, and how that might go. I guess my view on it is similar to Mr. Watt in that just the procedure of what this would look like.
Sure.
I'm not I'm not opposed to authorizing it, because I believe once people are on school grounds, in any situation where we think there's any type of safety issue around kids, certainly we want to have the situation addressed. And if it wasn't addressed, we'd ask, well, why didn't someone go? Right, why didn't the principal go to the car and talk to the parents, or, why didn't they try to figure out what was going on? So, this, to me, this is something that if it goes into policy, I have confidence that our people, with the help of law enforcement, are well trained to address these things and diffuse these things and get to the bottom of whatever's going on. I think maybe this isn't what Mr. Watt's point was, but to have that procedure or understanding of what authority is really being given, not that it doesn't already kind of exist there, but to understand that a little bit better might be helpful,
Okay,
if that makes sense.
sure. What we could do is we could bring like a middle school and a high school principal. Next time, we could talk through some of that if you'd like, and we can, help you feel more confident with how that looks. I wouldn't say it's something that's happening on a truly regular basis. It's happening as needed when something's going off the rails.
Mm-hmm.
That'd be fine.
One other part of the policy addresses sex offenders, So we obviously have had that in here for a while.
was the date back here?
2017.
So, and my understanding of some of the technology that we're looking at and installing will help identify people on outside of our buildings. And so if the sensitive nature was something like that, we certainly, as a board, would want to be able to address that situation, obviously. So for me, that's probably an important piece to this. But you were saying, Dr. Seaver, that maybe we could have some people come and
Sure,
talk from.
yeah, that might
that
be
level,
good, because then we
maybe
can
talk
kind of talk
procedures.
through a little bit more of what that looks like to help you understand it. And, yeah, from the sex offender perspective, I mean, we've had very good success with that. I mean, they call, they get permission. We make the arrangements for them to be able to attend events of their child, a music concert, if we will, or different things. And that's worked very, very smooth.
Yeah. In my example, bringing that up is maybe in someone that we don't have any idea, that's not in the community, that we
Yes.
haven't had contact with, all of a sudden is on one of our properties. And certainly we want to address that as quickly as possible.
Absolutely.
So I think that's probably a consideration into why we would want to add what we're talking about here, so.
You bet. Sure.
Yeah,
Go ahead, Mr. Borowski.
Yeah, I don't know if I have a question, but just since you brought up the sex offenders on school property, in the policy there, 3 paragraphs, the first one's about just a registered sex offender that has no ties to the district. The second one's a parent, and the third one's a student themselves. I believe that's correct. I guess I'm just wondering about the practicality of that, the first paragraph. So somebody who's a registered sex offender, are we talking about like maybe a relative or a friend of a family that wants to come to an event?
Sometimes a parent.
Okay, yeah, I guess I was talking about non-parent, because parent is in the second paragraph.
Oh, okay.
So I'm just wondering, yeah,
Yeah, relatives,
okay, friends.
friends.
All right, because I was just wondering about the practicality of that, so that, would they know to contact the school district? Is it maybe the parent of the school district that is letting them know that they need to do that, or do they know that in general, being a sex offender, that they need, anytime they're gonna be near children, they need to contact the organization that they're attending?
Yeah, I mean, I can't speak for them, but generally speaking, I mean, they know that they need to get permission to be on school property,
Okay,
yes.
all right. Go ahead.
Voight.
In that same paragraph, about sex offenders on school property, it refers to having to notify the superintendent or your designee. The principal would be, the person I would think should be contacted about the fact they would like to come to this concert, rather than your office.
When it says superintendent, it's a good point, Mrs. Voigt. When it says superintendent, that also refers to designee in all cases. So in our case, those are directed to the deputy superintendent, who then talks with, so if the person calls the principal refers them to the deputy superintendent, and then we authorize it and let the principal know.
So should we still keep it worded as superintendent, or?
It's fine, yeah, I mean, all of these policies, when they say superintendent, they can all refer to the designee.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yes, and so that way, if something changes, you know, let's pretend we end up saying, well, now somebody else is gonna do it, we don't have to go back and change the policy.
Sure. And by designee, is that just someone else on the administrative team, or including building principal?
Sometimes it could include the principal, it's primarily central office, but.
Admin,
but-
okay. That's what I figured, but
Yeah.
okay.
Okay. Looks like we are going to also add this to our list of things to
Yeah,
discuss
we'll
next
come
time.
back to it, it's fine.
All right,
It's
very
all
good. Let's move on to the final action item in our policies this evening, 7540.08, a new policy about artificial intelligence.
Yeah, we've got some interesting ones today, don't we? Like all these different new things that, it's understandable that we're having some questions and some wonders, and this one's no different, I would guess. What this one is trying to do is essentially kind of get out in front of artificial intelligence. We talked about it a little bit last week in our committee meetings when we were talking about the academic honesty policy. And I think, Mr. Wad, you were the one that might have even asked about artificial intelligence and what we're seeing with it. And so this policy is just trying to talk about the fact that there can be some positive impacts that come from this, and we're going to support the use of AI when it's consistent with our mission goals and operational integrity. I think that's a key term. Talks about how it has to balance with all of these other policies that we have, the use of artificial intelligence, and that the violation of the policy can result in disciplinary consequences up to and including suspension or termination of employment on the part of a staff member. So it's short, to the point, but questions that you might have around it.
Would it be possible for this policy to fix the first two policies that we discussed?
It
or-
might.
It doesn't do that, no?
We just
Okay.
we could pump them in there and see what it comes up with.
All
That's
right.
good.
In all seriousness. Any other questions or comments on this one? Mrs. Voigt?
I think there's a carryover from the previous policy at the top of this. It says it was adopted in 2017, but it's a new policy. So I think that needs to be struck.
Oh, good point. Yep. You see that, Julie? Okay. Yeah, we'll take care of that. Thank you, Mrs. Boyd.
Any other questions or comments, or? So, I know we'll get to the WASB stuff in a little while, but, you know, they did bring up a resolution around artificial intelligence. And I know that this is becoming something that probably some kids are even far ahead of us on.
Always.
And so we talk about a lot of the policies here. From a practical standpoint, what are we doing right now to kind of address some of the usage? Are we able to detect that to some degree?
Yeah, Ms. Genderman was
it's-
talking about that last week, and I think it was was it in student services we were talking about it? Yes. And, I mean, essentially, teachers can kind of tell, right? They know, especially at this point of the year, they know a student's writing style, they know a student's capabilities, and they're able to detect, and then there's some websites that you can use to put things back through and see if it's there or not. I think she may also made the example of, you know, kids have copied papers for years, they've done different things, right, that maybe are not as good as AI, but have done some things that maybe they wouldn't if they had to do it over again. But, so, I mean, we do see it. I wouldn't say, I invite Steve to comment on it too. I wouldn't say that it's pervasive. We actually talked about it with our Discover SDW group last week a little bit. But there are ways that teachers are uncovering it and working with kids to think differently about it.
It's very interesting. It's kind of a comment that you had made right up front was I kind of wondered about, you know, if a kid is doing okay or average and all of a sudden they're writing some great papers, you know, you might get suspicious. But depending on what platform is used, some of these are really, really good and hard to tell, you know, so.
Yeah, and
Mr.
I was
Bresky.
just going to comment, for what it's worth. I did attend the session at the state conference on artificial intelligence, and they gave a lot of good examples too, sort of the flip side of what you're mentioning, Mr. Zenobia, of either students or teachers using an artificial intelligence app to, you know, after they've written a paper, to then run it through the app to get feedback on either grammar corrections or just improvements they could make. And then teachers also using that to give the student feedback and then just add to what's, I guess, if I remember correctly, what the AI app like mentions, and then the teacher adds feedback to that. And I believe they also said, I'm checking my notes here from the session, that they can use apps to check for like state standards or class criteria to see if they've met the criteria in their writings. So this is a good reminder. I think I need to get with probably Ms. Gennerman just to share some of this information. And I believe they also mentioned there's some session coming up in August. Maybe she already knows about that, or administration does, that's talking about this topic again. And, you know, they just mentioned how it changes so fast that,
Yes.
I mean, that's only a few months down the road from, you know, January when the conference was, and, you know, 6 months later, it's going to be, you know, light years ahead of that too. So, so yeah, it was just interesting to hear I guess, some good examples of how it can be used, both by teachers or students. And obviously, you know, the other reasons that or the other examples that Mr. Zanobi brought up of just kind of doing the work for them. So
Sure.
I guess anything we can do to help admin or the teachers themselves, you know, learn about all that stuff would be helpful, I would hope, so.
Yeah, you bet.
Mrs. Voigt?
The one thing I like about this one is that they're not trying to say they've got it all figured out yet, but watch the changes in academic honesty, watch for changes in the student code of conduct, et cetera, that this is going to be an evolving,
Yes.
as soon as you think you've got it figured out, it's going to change the next day, you know? So, but I think by referencing all these policies that are involved in the application of AI, you know, the bullying, you know, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, that, you know, can be a part of the process, that, you know, be aware that, you know, it's going to be affected in all these different ways.
It's a good point, Mrs. Voigt.
Any other comments or questions? If not, I'd be looking for a motion. This is an action item. Moved by Mr. Bobrowski.
Also move, yep.
Second.
Seconded by Mr. Watt. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed? Passes 4-0. And now let's move on to our government relations portion. We have a couple discussion items. The first of which is our legislative updates, which there were quite a few.
All right, well, thanks, Mr. Zenobia. So this one, as I wrote in the background, there were supposedly going to be about 30 bills that were going to receive committee attention last week in the legislature. I tried to follow up on some of those. This is another big week. A number of those bills are coming back for action in both the Senate and the Assembly. A couple of the ones I pulled, just high-level updates. The Office of School Safety, we've talked about that in here before. Didn't get funded in the most recent biennial budget. They found some ESSER money to get it through December of 2024. And now there is a bill that is looking to extend it through September of '25, and that would use the money from concealed carry permits in order to fund the Office of School Safety. So that's being bantered around. And I know we've talked about it a little bit, but we do get the Speak Up, Speak Out, we get a number of those a week, where kids are using that to report things that are bothersome to them, and we're able to follow up on them and resolve them. So it is a tool that is helpful. The second thing I pulled that's been getting quite a bit of legs is the DPI request regarding the Act 20 timeline and trying to maybe back off the timeline a little bit. So we just had an Act 20 update at Teaching and Learning. There are a number of committees that are DPI/legislature committees that are working on finding what's going to be the universal screener for K-3 reading. That recommendation might not come out until July or even August, and it has to be implemented in September of this school year. So part of that thinking is, with the timeline is, could we bump that back instead of implementing in '24-'25, bump it back to '25-'26. Not sure what will come of that. Regardless, we'll be ready, and we'll do what we need to do, and we're taking all the necessary steps. That was a really good update that Melissa Yao did at Teaching and Learning about how all the steps we're taking. But it's just interesting and it's understandable. Like, that'll be a very short turnaround for whatever screener it is that districts will have to use. So we'll see where that goes. And then I pulled another one that's been getting some attention, which is a bill to mandate community-based 4K programming. So we, in the School District of Waukesha, already do community-based 4K programming, which means it's a 4K program within a daycare center with the daycare center teachers teaching the program using the district curriculum and the district expectations. So this bill is saying that you would, so there must be some issues somewhere that it's trying to address where you would have to work with any daycare or community partner that wanted to have a 4K if they didn't already. So we have 9. If there was a 10th or an 11th, we'd have to work with them. And it talks about how much you'd have to pay them in order to do it. So it's interesting. We'll see if it gets any legs, and we'll continue to track that. I think the other one that I didn't pull, but that we're hearing a lot about is the decoupling of school voucher programs and school voucher funding from public school funding. So as you know, right now, for the kids in the School District of Waukesha that choose to go to a voucher school or use a voucher to go to a private school, we levy for that. So we levy for that on our tax levy, and then that's a pass-through that goes directly to those schools. This would take it out of that levy, to my understanding, and it would be funded through the state differently. So it would take the money differently. We'd still be able to count the students if they were resident students, but I'm trying to get a handle on what that would truly mean for us. And they keep using the term decoupling, and I'm trying to understand how exactly the financial formula would work. So I'll keep monitoring that for us, and we'll see where that goes. But yeah, those are just a few. There's been a ton of activity going on, and I think it's basically because they're going to kind of wrap up here relatively soon. So they'll be done probably by March, and then probably have the summer off and be back in the fall. So the next couple of weeks could be pretty big in terms of can they get anything through, and then obviously depending on what gets through, what is the governor willing to sign and put into law. So we'll see, and by the time we get to our next meeting, we'll probably have some updates on these and other topics that they're sorting through right now.
Mrs. Voigt?
On page 4, 5, of the 5 pages of your, section, it talks about the numerous education focus bills on things like civics and cursive education mandates.
Oh, yes.
We offer the civics test
We do.
already,
Yes,
and that would be, is that something that is already a mandate statewide, or?
it is.
It is? Okay, so they're thinking about changing that? I guess I wasn't exactly understanding what they're thinking about in the civics context.
I have to click on, I can maybe click on that in here and
Well, and the
tell
other
you.
thing, well, maybe you know off the top of your head, do we offer cursive as a requirement in, because cursive education mandates is in here too? Do we also offer cursive?
I don't know if we'd call it a mandate, but I believe we teach it in 3rd grade.
Agreed.
But I'll do some verification of that with Ms. Genderman and Mrs. Yao.
Any other questions on any of the updates or legislation here?
All right. Well, thank
I
you.
think it's good that we've had so much of this being talked about in our legislature. There's a lot of
Yeah, I do too.
areas to focus on, and it seems like there's a push to improve our overall educational outcomes in the state, which is badly needed. So
Agreed.
certainly applaud all those efforts on both sides of the aisle. Mrs. Voigt?
I was going to say, I was not able to attend the section on the WASB legislative update that they had at state conference. But it turns out to be a 23-page packet of information, which, again, so many, it's hard for us to cover in a very small period of time here. But they specifically, went through the ongoing conversations that are going on right now at the Task Force on Human Trafficking, Artificial Intelligence, Childhood Obesity, and Truancy. So those are kind of 4 issues that they're, trying to really address this legislative session, which I thought was, partly in the report that you had as well. Some of those were listed there, and we're seeing the, those topics as definitely ones that are impacting our district. But I thought if any of you want to download that packet, it was really quite insightful to go through all the many, many, many things that they're talking about.
That's great. Thank you.
All right, our next discussion item this evening is the WASB Delegate Assembly Review, which had taken place on January 17th in Milwaukee. And I guess that's my portion to review here, so.
Yes.
So just take it from here. So I had attended as our delegate on the 17th, and, overall, the process is very interesting. I think there was probably, 400 people, representing most all the districts in the state there to talk about the resolutions. So it's an interesting delegation. I know we discussed the resolutions to some degree, but to see how others in our roles elsewhere in the state, put forward resolutions and come and debate them and discuss them is very interesting. So, on what I had done, I think I had voted no on 4 of our resolutions, and I had voted yes on the rest of them. The no's were 2, 5, 10, and 11. I won't go all the way back through all those, but we can discuss them individually. So what else was interested about some of was gone through was there were attempts to amend several of the resolutions. Resolution 2, which was dealing with stipends for cooperating teachers, there was an attempt to amend that. And so it was amended, and that was one that I had voted no on, but that was one of the few amendments that had gone through.
That was one, David, that you had the concerns about for the
Yeah.
funding. I thought
Yeah.
it was like, yep, that's exactly what we talked about.
It was very interesting, and honestly, some of the discussion was around the language of, was it the state funding it or was it DPI funding it? So there was a few others. One of the interesting ones was 11, which was a very lengthy resolution. And there were parts of it that there were attempts to amend. There was actually 4 different amendments brought on that resolution alone. And they had actually all failed, and then the policy was passed as it was. But there was a lot of going back and forth on it. It was kind of an interesting process. I think it probably took up most of the time of the day was on that one policy alone that had gone back and forth several times. So that was, of the 11 that were presented, the delegation went fairly quickly. I think it was maybe 2.5, maybe not even 2.5 hours. And I think last year it was 5 or 6. I think it was a very long delegation. But it went very smoothly. Everybody that got up and participated, which there were many, did great at stating what they were up there to talk about and moved it forward. So at the end, there was 2 resolutions that were brought forward that did not make the final timeline. Well, I shouldn't say that. One did not make the final timeline. It was a proposal submitted by, Milwaukee Public Schools. It was submitted after the September 15th deadline to bring a resolution. The other resolution was a resolution that came from New London School Board on Save Women's Sports. That resolution, the way it was written, my understanding, was very lengthy. It wasn't, I guess it was too broad. There was too much resolution here that was written, as opposed to when you look at the WASB resolutions, they're just a few sentences. So it was denied on that. rationale. And so there was a movement to bring it back to the floor by New London. They had revised it to bring it back, and it would have been a two-thirds vote that would have been needed. And the reason I bring it up is I had actually got up to comment to say that I would be in support of bringing this resolution back so that it could be heard and debated. But it failed. It was, I think, 2-1 that it was voted down. And the MPS proposal that was also brought forward, that resolution was also not considered basically on the same merits, which was the time frame the school boards didn't have time to look at them and really consider them and send a delegate there with some knowledge of those discussions. I do think if WASB wants to remain relevant, that it really should take up the sports bill of women in sports, competing against biological boys and males, and how that is currently affecting and will affect sports in the future. So I thought that was very important. I thought WASB missed an opportunity to maybe have that discussion now as opposed to next year, which I know it will most certainly be brought back, if not by New London, but others. So I thought that was very interesting, as was the entire process. But if any of you would like to share your thoughts, I know Mrs. Voigt was in attendance for the delegation as well, and maybe she has a couple of thoughts on it.
You have the booklet as well. Yeah,
I do.
I found it interesting to take a look at all of the WASB resolutions that they have, passed in the past and what they're all about. I specifically wanted to look at it because we had talked a little bit about potentially suggesting a change in the safety law that requires the monthly fire drills and extensive waste, I see of class learning time to do that on a monthly basis when, like, all the other drills are 2 times a year. And I think the fire drill could fit in that category very easily. So I was trying to see if that could fit into a resolution per se. And I've talked to several people there about it. Everybody agreed this is a great idea, but probably this isn't the way to go. It's like, talk to your legislator, like reach out to Scott Allen and say, hey, this is something that, you might want to take a look at. If you want to try to improve, one very simple, easy change to make for the school and give them more time to teach kids and not be disrupted every month, all the kids in all the schools in the entire state of Wisconsin, way more times than what they need to go outside and just stand for a minute or two in the same spot they have, 6 other times that year or 8 other times that year. It could be something that we could potentially, suggest to our legislator more so than maybe necessarily going through WASB resolutions.
Sure. Me neither. Mr. Watt?
Yeah, and I don't know if you have easy access to this info. If not, just if you could let me know at some point in the future. I'm just curious, of the resolutions that were on the agenda, I'm just curious which ones passed. Actually, let me rephrase it. I'm interested to know which ones passed that you voted no. Thank you, Mr. Borowski. I'm curious to know if you can tell me which resolutions were adopted that you voted no to, and conversely, which ones you voted for that were not adopted, if you know. If you don't, if you can just provide that at some other point.
Yeah, no, I can tell you which ones I voted no on. I'm trying to remember if any were voted down.
I would say 2 would be the first one.
2 was the first one that was
Right,
voted
you
down.
mentioned that you, had voted no.
Oh, voted no on,
And then
yeah.
it was amended. And the nice thing that what Dr. Siebert has just shared is the result. And they're saying the WASB supports creation of a stipend program, amended, to be funded by the state.
I'm sorry, so these, I didn't realize, these were the ones that were actually adopted?
This is now adopted.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay, I
that-
see
yeah,
the
that-
language there now.
Yeah,
I'm
that just
sorry.
came out, like, I think this afternoon. I
afternoon?
just saw it, and I printed them
Okay.
for you, yes.
So let me maybe restate my question for you then, Mr. Zenobia.
Mm-hmm.
Of these ones that are listed here as having been adopted, which ones did you vote no to on final passage?
I was just looking at all of them. I believe they were all passed, correct?
Yes, what's in this list are all the ones that
Yeah.
were adopted.
Yeah, that's all 11. And the two I mentioned at the end were not voted on at all, so
Right.
those
We're
did
not
not.
in here.
Right, those did not come to the floor. So of all of these, the ones that I voted no on were Resolution 2, stipends for cooperating teachers.
Right.
5, which was
Specialty schools?
state specialty schools, yes. 10 and 11, I had voted against. And as far as a rationale, there was a lot of discussion around even the first one, student teachers and interns, and how some of that would be funded. I thought the second one, where they talked a little bit more about it, there was actually some attempt to amend the language there was having to do with compensating those teachers, trying to define what that compensation was and that it should be higher. So, again, not really understanding or knowing how that's going to ferret out in real life or how that would be lobbied against or for, I had said no to that. I thought the policy had even weakened further on the second one. On number 5, again, it was, that one was around the IEP teams. A lot of people felt that one was too narrow and that the language there should include more than just the IEP team. So that was a no vote for me. And then 10 and 11 there was a lot of discussion around, I guess 11 probably is the best example of that, but there was a lot of discussion around trying to take out and rewrite certain portions of 11. One was to take out, student achievement. I think that's 4.8.6. And one of the problems I had with that was, let's see here. If I can find it. So on the evaluation portion, there was a discussion around looking at student achievement as a way to evaluate teachers. And that, the wish there was for that to be stricken, so that would not be a measurement of performance based on staff, wherever they would be in Wisconsin. So I thought that was a weakening of the resolution. There was another to strike the portion on charter schools or dismissal of staff. So overall, I felt that the resolution was doing too much to try to, I would say, take away some of the areas where a board like ours has control and power. If we're going to look at, performance issues, if we're going to look at compensation issues, all these things to say, okay, we're going to pass a resolution to things that may be detrimental to that individual local school board. That's kind of how I viewed the policy. I think overall there are some good sections in those last two, but I thought that there was too much, it was too overreaching, and I didn't feel that it was, on one hand, really well written enough to understand all the different things that were trying to be chipped away. So, of the no votes, that was probably, the two that had the most consideration, and certainly that was the case for the delegation, I think, especially the last one. There's a lot to talk through there, so. I don't know if that answers your question, or?
Yeah.
Okay. Are there any other comments or questions? Yes, there is. Mr. White, go ahead.
ahead. So, WASB's official position now is to lobby for the elimination, essentially, of revenue limits. In a nutshell, but that's basically what the membership voted to tell our lobbyists to go and do, is tell the state legislature and governor to remove revenue limits and basically allow districts. Okay.
I think so. No question in my mind. Is it the prerogative of WASB or any other organization that lobbies on behalf of education to get more funding wherever they can? And I think, that's something to consider, as Mrs. Voigt said earlier, taking it to your local delegate and saying, hey, what really should and shouldn't be done, right? As opposed to an organization like this saying, okay, well, we're going to lobby for these things. Part of the issue that I have with it is just that, we're moving the whole delegation forward without having a consideration for what are probably some minority voices throughout Wisconsin now on school boards who have a different way of thinking. Maybe that was traditionally, more money. Now, more money is great when you can get it. So there's that balance. But I agree that to make that the thrust of it is probably not where I would put my
So
effort.
I would just offer an editorial opinion.
Sure.
They are not the Wisconsin Association of School District Administrators. They are the Wisconsin Association of School Boards, which are elected representatives that may have a very different opinion on whether the goal of a school district should be to go out and gobble up as many taxpayer dollars as they can without there being limits imposed. So, and I tend to agree with you that this is probably one of those areas where there is, based on the outcomes of elections all over the state at school boards, a growing percentage of their delegation that sees things differently. Was the vote close? I'm just curious.
I did write down the vote on that one, the percentage. It may have been a little bit closer. There was a lot of discussion on that one. It may have been a little bit closer than most, but most of the resolutions were 40, 60 or greater in favor. So
Yeah,
to get 60 to 70, I think one or two passed with 90%. So to get that many people in the delegation to say, hey, yeah, we're for this.
Yeah.
It is a representation of each board. The delegate themselves has leeway, certainly, in how they vote. So I don't know if that is always reflective, maybe, of what, each district thinks. It's hard to say, but it's probably pretty close, would be my guess, so. Mrs. Voigt.
What I thought was interesting is that you have every small school, has the same equal vote to the large schools. In this context, we have, tremendously more students that are impacted by the decisions that this board makes than there would be in the New Londons and in the Reedsvilles and the Brillians and all the other districts that are there.
Sure.
And, like talking to my cousin who's a school board member in Reedsville, which is a very, very, very small town, he would have equal vote to your representation, for Waukesha being seventh largest in the state, which I thought was an interesting concept. It's truly a, one vote for each district.
Yeah, certainly, and I think just overall, the idea that, WASB brings to the table legislatively, hey, we represent all of these districts statewide. Which, to some extent, I would agree with. I think maybe at times there might be some difference of opinion of how and what is important to advance. So it's an interesting process for sure. So I guess time will tell sort of how these organizations operate in the future and what their influence is. And so we shall see, I suppose. But with that, I don't know if there's any more questions or comments. I think we are on to other business. I don't know if there's anything to, Mrs. Voigt.
Would we want to pursue the idea of this legislative change, probably not through WASB as the most realistic way to make it happen, but to reach out to Scott Allen and suggest, a change that would be beneficial to everybody in the state of Wisconsin if he would choose to proceed with it?
I certainly think so. I don't know how we would necessarily bring that forward as a committee. We could certainly discuss it more. And there's certainly opportunities to speak with our representation for sure. So, and the next time we do that.
Should I, draft what the concept is that have been talking to people about? What would be, I don't know, what's it?
So, I'm sorry, this is a point of maybe parliamentary procedure. Are proposed topics for future agendas debatable items? I mean, can we have a discussion around that? My understanding was if you want something added to the agenda, you simply request that it be added to the agenda and there can't be discussion around it. Because otherwise, the person requesting something to be put on a future agenda is allowed to make their case, and my understanding is it's not debatable. It's not something that anyone else can weigh in on.
I think, to your point, my question was more of how do we approach this? And, is this something we would put in policy? Is this something that we would do individually? I don't know. I think if any individual board member wants to pursue something and go that route, I think that's very doable. I'm not exactly sure how we would itemize it on the agenda, but we can have a discussion around it.
Sure.
I think
I
that'd be
think
the first
absolutely
start.
we could.
So let's do it there, to your point, Mr. Watt. So let's put it on the agenda and have a discussion around it and how we might proceed as a board or as an individual in doing that.
I don't know if you got your question answered.
Any
Mr.
other,
Yeah, I think we're addressing this the proper way now. It was proposed as an agenda item, it gets added, then
Sure.
discussion occurs when it's added as an agenda item.
But along those lines, Mr. Watt, this is for the committee, someone can suggest, I'm just talking in general now because I was thinking of other items that have been brought up in either the committee or the board setting. Someone can recommend an agenda item, but isn't it the discretion of the committee chair of whether we actually put it on the agenda?
It is.
it can, yes, be.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. So, are there any other business ideas for next time? If not, then we will have our next policy committee meeting on April 8th here in the boardroom at 7 o'clock. That's what we'll shoot for. We thank you all for attending and have a good evening. Thank you.